Welcome everyone, this is James on Justice, and I want to talk to you today about a topic that is growing in interest and growing in discussion and debate and growing honestly in some of the difficulties and challenges of the legal system, and that has to do with police work when there is some necessity, or at least perceived necessity, to use physical force. We all know what happened a couple of years ago with George Floyd and Officer Derek Chauvin. And it really sparked not just a controversy, but a national and a global conversation about police work, how it can be better, and what are some solutions that can help prevent the use of excessive force like what Officer Chauvin has used, and what can also empower police officers to do their job with more confidence and more skill in order to better protect themselves from getting into situations where their own use of force causes either some serious injury to a person they arrest or, at worst, death. So as a defense attorney for 20 years now, I want to just share some thoughts that I have about how police officers can really increase their own ability to avoid potential lawsuits, civil lawsuits. And we know in some states they're actually working on passing and have passed laws that strip away the qualified immunity that police officers have because they work for the government. If qualified immunity is stripped away, then police officers are left to handle their own defense, their own legal fees, their own liability. And that could mean hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential liability in a civil lawsuit against a police officer who's just out there trying to do her job. So I want to really emphasize one thing before we go into much more detail, that I am here not as an opponent or an enemy of police, because I know a lot of police officers. I have police officers who are my friends, who are good friends. I also am a defense attorney, and I understand how important it is to have accountability in the legal system. And as a defense attorney, part of my job is not to go and point the finger and say, oh, police officer so-and-so, you really screwed up. You suck as a person. You suck as a police officer. No. My job is to ensure that my clients who have been subject to some kind of arrest or a criminal charge are treated fairly and justly, and that their individual and constitutional rights are protected under the law, so that we don't devolve into a state of lawlessness and chaos. All of us, including lawyers, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and police officers, have to play by the rules. And if we don't play by the rules, or if one person doesn't play by the rules, then the game isn't fought fairly, or the win isn't won fairly. Just like in football, basketball, baseball, we have referees and umpires to make sure that the players play fairly, so that when skill is matched against skill, one player to another or one team against another, all things are equal except for their ability to either outwork their competitor, outthink their competitor, outdo, outrun, outplay, you name it. We all know what a good football game looks like, or a good soccer game, or a good baseball game. When players are playing at their top level, but they're also playing fairly, so that there's an even playing field for everyone in the game. Everybody has the ability to succeed and win, but there can only be one winner and one loser in most games. In the criminal justice system, that analogy is true in most ways, but not completely, because there doesn't always have to be a winner or a loser. Let's face it, some people do stupid things, break the law intentionally, and deserve to have some consequence. Hopefully that consequence gets them to change their ways so that they can live a better life. But just as some individual citizens break the law, there are times when individual police officers either break the law or violate policies or even violate people's constitutional rights. And when they do, they should be held accountable so that hopefully they will not do it again. When you have these situations like the terrible saga of what happened with George Floyd, no officer, no judge, no prosecutor can bring George back to this world. That's the tragedy of when lethal force is used by police officers. It's not to say that it's not justified or necessary sometimes, but it is to simply highlight the fact that I'm sure most police officers do not want to be in a position where they have to draw their weapon and shoot someone. Nobody generally wants to be in that situation. At least officers should be looking for ways to avoid use of lethal force at all costs. But we're in a society now where I think a few different influences have converged. One of which is, there's been maybe for the last 15 years or so, young people, children growing up in what some people call the snowflake generation or the snowflake environment, where you've got a soccer game of second graders, they play, everybody wins. And I've heard some teams don't even keep score so that everybody can walk away feeling like they're a winner. And the truth is, yeah, everybody is a winner in the sense of their own human dignity. But when you're having sports competition, it's important, I believe, that young kids, that teenagers, even young adults learn that there are times where it is better to lose at something so that you can learn from that experience. Learn what you need to work on. Learn what you need to do better. Learn what skills you can work on. Learn what you don't already know that helps you become a better person, that helps you become stronger, that helps you become more aware. Because the reality of life is not everyone is going to win. There will be winners and there will be losers. And so I think that's affected a lot of the younger, new police officers that have come in who have been told they're all winners, who on some level believe that they can't lose in a given situation, otherwise they'll be shattered. Their own feeling of their dignity or self-worth will be shattered if they lose in a situation. And that translates into police work where I have seen video after video, body cam videos, patrol car videos, in cases that I've worked on personally, where younger officers are much quicker to react to a tense situation, even when they're really objectively, or at least looking in on the outside, which I know isn't always a fair way to judge things after the fact. But they don't have to react so quickly, or their response is excessively dramatic, out of fear that if they get behind in a situation, or if they start to lose in this tug of war between a potential arrestee or a perpetrator, the subject that they're going to detain, and the officer, then the officer is going to totally lose confidence and totally lose the ability to think through carefully what should be done. And anybody who has gone through police academy or done basic combatives training or DT work understands the case law, Graham versus Connor, where an officer can use reasonable force in detaining or arresting a subject. What is reasonable is this sort of willy-nilly standard that judges and juries and attorneys all kind of parse through after the fact. So if an officer is in an arrest situation and the subject gets a little crazy or pushes back a little, and then suddenly the officer pulls out a gun and shoots the person in the back, okay, that is probably going to be considered excessive force under the law, and most likely the officer will lose her job. The officer will be sued for civil liability, violation of that person's civil rights. And even more so now than I'd say 20, 30 years ago, there is a good chance that that officer is going to be charged with manslaughter or even second-degree murder. There's no more free passes for police officers. Whether that's good or bad, that's up to our society to decide. But as a criminal defense attorney, I feel badly for police officers who don't have the skills or the training to deal with these physical interactions, the ability to manage it more clearly in their mind, because that's where it starts. Just like in a competition, if you start to fall behind, you're playing one-on-one pickup basketball, you start to fall behind and your opponent is outscoring you, your mind is going to start to play games on you. And you're either going to feel defeated and start to give up, or if you've trained your mind to be more aware that it doesn't matter what the score is, I can always move forward, I can always do my best, I can always keep shooting, I can dig deeper, I can get more focused and concentrated and win this game, then you will be more confident and you will have the mentality that allows you to handle the situation better, instead of just throwing your hands up and giving in or giving up, or at worst, for police officers in that situation, freaking out and kind of losing control. And I think that's one of the worst things that can happen with police officers when use of force is required. And I think often, that problem of losing control and either starting to punch or put a stranglehold on an arrestee, or again, at worst, pull out a gun and shoot with unjustified lethal force, is one of the biggest problems that I think we need to address. That police officers, you do yourself the best thing you can and start to address that personally. Because again, we're in this society where if you do something wrong in terms of using excessive force, whether it's with a gun or with your own hands, you will be scrutinized. Why? Because there's more video cameras all over the place. Most officers now have body cams. There's patrol car video. People have their cell phones. They walk up and start shooting videos. They have a legal constitutional right to do that. It's in public square. And so there's much more scrutiny, for better or for worse. That's just the way it is. And so as a police officer, you owe it to yourself not to just simply believe that because I've never been in a situation that has spun out of control, I never will. Okay? This sense, what psychologists call normalcy bias, which is the thought that, well, it's never happened to me before, it's never going to happen. It's the same thing we all think about, in terms of a car accident. Sometimes I like to go a little faster than I should. And I assume that because I've never gotten into a bad car accident, I never will. It's a false assumption. And I should be more aware, and there are times where I try to dial it down and go a little slower. But there are other times where I'm like, I need to go. I'm going to hit 100, 105. Let's go. It's not too fast, but yeah, it's breaking the speed limit. We all have normalcy bias in some way, and it can really be crippling in a position, a profession like police work, where your chances of having a hand-to-hand combative situation with somebody you're trying to arrest or detain or move from one cell to another, for those of you who are corrections officers, is way higher than it is for somebody like me who's an attorney, and I'm not normally getting into physical confrontations with people on the streets. So it really is in the best interest of police officers to begin to find ways to not only get more self-confidence, so that in a situation where they may feel either antagonized or challenged by or bested by an individual who they need to arrest, that doesn't shatter their expectations of what they can do in that situation. It doesn't make them just give up or, at worst, freak out and start going crazy on this subject. They can maintain presence of mind. And I think one of the best ways that I've been learning about and I just started training in is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. There has been a handful of studies now where police departments and individual police officers who have begun training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and especially those where the Jiu Jitsu is sort of fine-tuned for specific police scenarios, typical arrest situation or a violent subject type situation. That training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is this often mistaken art, people often link it to MMA, think it's just like you're going to go in and kick somebody's face and break their nose and bust their teeth out. But really, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is more about grappling. It's about body dynamics. It's about leverage. It's actually about trying to use less force, trying to use less exertion against the subject you're trying to take control of, in a way that actually the studies have shown decreases both officer and subject injuries by around 50%, which is pretty huge when you're talking about, one of two situations. If you use jiu-jitsu, if you're trained in jiu-jitsu as a police officer, you're going to decrease your chances of having an injury, either yourself, that's going to put you out of work. Who wants to be out of work? You might get some unemployment, or not unemployment, but workers' comp. But again, then you got to nurse an injury. You got to deal with some problem that is going to set you back professionally. Or you injure a subject. And if they have a good attorney and they work through their defense case, they could come back and sue you. You potentially could be charged with assault or aggravated assault or felonious assault. I've seen some jurisdictions now where, with some of these progressive prosecutors, police are actually in the crosshairs of these prosecutors more often than people who are out there doing drugs. And I don't quite understand it. I mean, I'm old school, so I'm not saying that I think it's a good idea or not to have progressive prosecution. Some ideas can be good, but one of the things that I don't think is actually helpful in our legal system in trying to maintain order in the criminal justice system is the fact that police officers often are scrutinized even more than your average citizen, in terms of how physical force is used in a particular confrontation or combative situation. So again, another reason why you police officers out there owe it to yourself to really start to give yourself a better chance at avoiding all of the legal ramifications that go along with using excessive force, by training yourself, your body, by training your mind, probably even more important, so you can keep mental clarity in the midst of a confrontation. In these studies with police officers that have used jiu-jitsu, their mental clarity is much greater after they've trained in jiu-jitsu, because they understand that, okay, a physical tussle isn't the end of things. It's not going to put me down or put me out. It's just happening, and I can handle it. And when you have more skills, just like in basketball, you have more skills to navigate the court. You have more confidence, and therefore when you start to lose, you don't freak out. You can stay composed. And for police officers who have to deal with this question of escalation, and you've probably all seen some kind of escalation chart or grid or diagram that says, okay, depending on the amount of resistance, you can use X amount of responsive force. If the resistance increases, you can use more force. Well, if your head isn't on straight, if you're not clear on what you're even thinking and what you're doing because you're not composed in the midst of some kind of confrontational situation, then you will not be the best judge of what level of force to use within a given situation. And that, I think, is so key for police officers who want to avoid the use of lethal force but also want to avoid the use of excessive force, is that you want to train your mind. You want to train your mind and your body, so when you're in a situation where there's a confrontation with a subject, even someone who's bigger than you, when you have the skills and tactics of something like jiu-jitsu, you will be able to navigate that with much more composure and use different strategies that help you maintain control or obtain control and then maintain control without having to hurt the subject or without having to hurt yourself. Isn't that the best case scenario? That's why the use of less force in your police work is key. It's going to help you not only with your confidence, your mental clarity, but when you have more confidence and mental clarity, you actually enjoy life more, you enjoy your professional work more, you enjoy being out on the street more. You're there to protect and serve. And being able to realize that you actually can do that better when you're better trained, when you have more awareness, environmental awareness, when you have more mental acuity, you can protect and serve better. Because oftentimes, isn't it true? I mean, I've dealt with clients who they already feel intimidated by a police officer coming up to them to talk to them, let alone when they say they're under arrest. But then you add component of drugs or alcohol, and that subject is not thinking clearly. They're not rational. And so as the police officer, it's your job to be in the position where you're rational, where your mind is still enough that you can control the situation through rational thinking instead of reactivity. Instead of being the one that's like the subject who's just reacting to what's happening next, reacting and not controlling, you can be the one, if you learn something like jiu-jitsu, to be the calming force. And with so much talk about de-escalation in police work today, and as I understand it, it's a good theory, but in practice some of it just misses the mark because it can help initially, and you want to move things slower when you're trying to calmly detain a subject. But if a subject continues to refuse to go into custody, okay, then you're going to have to resort to something a little more physical. I'm not saying de-escalation is a bad idea or doesn't work, but from my conversations with police officers, they say it misses the mark because it doesn't allow them, it doesn't give them all of the tools they need to handle the wide variety of situations where people resist on different levels. So, I want to emphasize that, again, as a defense attorney, I think learning something like jiu-jitsu is really helpful to you as police officers. And as someone who is married and has children, I want police officers in my neighborhood. I want police officers in my town. I even want police officers who are looking out for my teenage boys who might be out there screwing around. So if they do something stupid, they can learn that there are ramifications so that they don't just keep doing stupid things and it gets worse and worse and worse and then they end up in prison. I appreciate police work. I appreciate the officers in my community that do their job and do it well. And I just want to emphasize that I appreciate the work of police officers, and as a defense attorney, we're all really striving for the same goal, which is law and order. And in the criminal justice system now, which is going through all sorts of changes itself, I think it's really important for police officers who want to avoid being subjected to civil lawsuit or criminal charges or suspension, loss of career, to give yourself more tools and tactics and abilities and mental clarity to do your job better in this environment that's fraught with all sorts of difficulties. I think this has been top of mind for me because I'm handling a case right now where a client has been charged with resisting police, 3 counts of that, and this guy has no criminal record. He was simply pulled over for speeding. One officer was handling the situation well, calmly. He was going to check his driver's license, registration, insurance. And as the first officer who pulled my client over was checking his record, a second officer comes in and has a very short conversation with him and immediately escalates the situation. Orders my client out of the vehicle. He's not even engaging in anything of an open conversation to understand what's going on here, to better understand whether he has reasonable cause to order him out of the vehicle or probable cause to arrest him. And then the whole thing goes sideways and 4 or 5 officers jump on my client. They're pulling him out of the vehicle, ends up getting tased with about a 1-second notice, thrown on the ground, tackled, got all sorts of bumps and bruises. And whether or not police were justified in doing that, okay, that's what we're working through the criminal justice system in. We're currently litigating the case, so I can't talk too much about that. But it just reminds me that in normal day-to-day situations for police officers, and I know there's always someone who's totally crazy and needs a lot of force to be detained, protect the other people around, protect the other officers and so forth. Yes, that can be justified. But from, again, 20 years of experience, by and large, most police work in terms of any confrontation, it's just based on basic human nature where individuals are threatened or intimidated or scared by police officers because they don't have interactions with the police very much. And so I think as police officers, when you give yourselves greater abilities, something like jiu-jitsu training, when you allow yourself to expand and grow, not only personally but professionally, it's going to change the way that you do your police work, and you will have more confidence. You will be able to deal with a difficult subject better. You will not suddenly react and exponentially increase your use of force in a way that violates somebody's constitutional rights and potentially lands you in front of a criminal judge who's going to decide your fate on a manslaughter charge. Using less force just makes sense, and as a defense attorney, I want to advocate for that. I want to essentially encourage you police officers out there to look for ways to learn about jiu-jitsu, to begin training in jiu-jitsu, to make it a part of your lives, because you, more than most professionals, have to deal with combative situations. And when you have the skills and the mindset that jiu-jitsu can give you, then you're going to protect yourself and you're going to protect society much more effectively. So I hope that's helpful. I'm James on Justice. Keep fighting for justice. We're all on the same team. Let's try to make our world a better place.